Hello and welcome to The Practical Side. The Practical Side is a show on our YouTube channel where we talk with different experts of law and understand the practical side of law. And today we will be discussing about criminal law, which is there in CS Executive, Jurisprudence, Interpretation, and General Laws. Joining me today is a special guest, Advocate Arun G. Hello, Arun. Welcome to The Practical Side.
Hello, Alok. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation and also an platform. And thank you.
Thanks a lot for joining us. Before I go ahead, let me briefly introduce Advocate Arun. Arun is a graduate from Bangalore University. He is a lawyer with more than 12 years experience, and what is interesting is he has dealt with all sides of criminal matters, and also he has represented in the High Court. And he's a specialist in trial matters, or what we call as a trial advocate. Whether it is cases related to rape, murder, or any of the heinous crimes, Arun is a lawyer who is really doing a great job with over 1 decade experience, and we are very happy that he has joined us. Now, in today's episode, we'll be discussing mainly about the basics of the CRPC and IPC, and also why you, as a student of a corporate law course like company secretary, should be aware of these particular laws. So, the first question, Arun, very basic because students are the audience. What do you say is criminal law? According to you, somebody asks you what is criminal law, how will you define it?
Well, as the very name itself defines it, criminal law is basically law which involves of regulating and punishing the wrong offenders, especially a wrongdoer would be punished, and for that there is a prescribed law. That is more or less it's a criminal law, and of course now as the dimensions of the society has changed, even the criminal law and its dimensions have also changed. So in that way, as any layman's understanding, criminal law is a law where it would be dealing with offenders or a person who has been facing with the criminal charges.
I think that's a very nice and simple way to put it. And just to give a context to all the students, see, you may think, why should we study IPC or for that matter CRPC when we are concentrating on corporate law? But all the famous, or what I can say, infamous cases in the corporate world are all criminal cases, whether it is the Satyam case in 2008, or even if you look at even behind that, the Harshad Mehta case, or recently our Vijay Mallya case or Nirav Modi case. All these are primarily criminal cases or economic offenses which are criminal in nature, and that is why it is important for you to understand. And just now Arun used the word offender. So even RBI calls willful defaulter or economic offender for people who have done it with a motive. So that is why criminal law is important. So now in criminal law, Arun, even for students, they have the basics. Since it's not the LLB course, they have basics of IPC and CRPC. So by any chance, have you gone through the syllabus of CS, and can you briefly tell us about these two chapters?
Yes. For this platform, I did my small homework, and I also went through like the whatever the syllabus which has been prescribed, and more or less what has been dealt is with criminal side. The subject matter wise CRPC, that is a Criminal Code of Procedure 1973. The second is of Indian Penal Code, and the third is probably in our earlier discussion it did not come up. It is also the Indian Evidence Act. All these three are very much essential for an practicing advocate, and as also a person who deals with the criminal law or in any facet of an criminal subject matter. Understanding or a basic understanding of all three subjects is very much important.
Yeah. So, in brief, what is the difference between IPC and CRPC? This is a common question at the student level. They have this. So, can you please share your views?
See, the names itself, like be it the Criminal Procedure Code, the Indian Penal Code, the Indian Evidence Act, that itself would give us the 50% answer to it. See, Criminal Procedure Code is basically a procedural law as to how the affairs of any criminal investigation or any adjudication of a criminal case has to be done. It has been prescribed. The procedures have been prescribed. And insofar as Indian Penal Code is concerned, the very penal is nothing but the punishment, or the very understanding has to, if a person is to be punished for a particular act, the act will be defined, and the consequence, that is the punishment, would also be defined. And that is what is called as, in the understanding of law, if since it is, we are also dealing with, I believe that your students are also more or less would be a law students also.
Yes.
So concept of substantive justice, or the substantive law, or the procedural law, these are the basic things which we learn in the law schools. So Indian Penal Code has its basis as a substantive law, and when it comes to Criminal Procedure Code is of the procedural code, where if you ask me, the Indian Penal Code is the purpose, and the procedural code is an entrance and the exit, how the justice has to be rendered, keeping the substantive justice.
Okay. So now, with whatever you said, if you could give an example in IPC, any one section which talks about the substantive law, and in CRPC, how it works, very quickly in a short way.
Yes. See, it is like this. If you see Indian Penal Code, you see various sections, and especially when we are dealing with corporate related students, or rather a company secretariat students, we are also dealing with, when it comes to offenses, we also will that the very first act, whenever there is an misdoing, is cheating is called, fraud is called, and willful default. These are the words which are normally used in the corporate side also, and white collar crimes also. So in that way, if you go back to our Indian Penal Code, the chapter which deals with economic offences, or primarily the offence with respect to a property. So where there is an entrustment, when there is an entrustment with a belief, with an understanding, and thereafter it has been not done with an intention to make an unlawful gain, that chapter would be dealt under this chapter 17 of Indian Penal Code, which primarily talks about the offences pertaining to the property. Okay, in that, if you see section 415, it talks about cheating. The cheating is defined under section 415. So if an act of cheating is to be proven in the court, the requirement is that there should be a deceptive act. The primary first thing what has to be seen in a cheating, if any one person is to be called as a cheater, or is to be proven to be an act of cheating, there should be an act from the inception, from the very moment if a transaction is started, with an intention to commit a crime or to deceive a person, thereby he makes an unlawful gain, and the person or the victim will have an unlawful loss. When these three things are seen in a particular act, that is when we can bring home the act of a cheating. This is where it has been defined under Indian Penal Code. Now when it comes to CRPC, now CRPC deals with procedures. If you see 420 as an offense, or a cheating as an offense, 415 is a definition clause. 420 is the punishment clause. It is prescribed under IPC. Now when it comes to how it has to be adjudicated in the court, before which court it has to be adjudicated, all these questions or the answers would be rendered under Code of Criminal Procedure. It prescribes under as to whether, for example, a 420 offense or a 415 offense, whether it should be dealt by a court of a magistrate, or it should be dealt by a court of district court or a sessions court, what has been called under especially criminal matters. So here, if you see CRPC, just to continue with my example of 415, the cheating offenses, it is an offense where it is punishable less than 7 years or less 7 years. So it is tried by a magistrate. Under IPC, it defines only what is the offense, what is the punishment. Under CRPC, it tells as to before which court it would be dealt at, or under what procedures, what all procedures are prescribed is under CRPC.
Okay, that was a good example. So for students, in short, what Arun is sharing with us is very simple. IPC tells you what is the definition and the punishment, but that's of no use if you're not able to implement it through CRPC. You'll know what is the offense, but in CRPC, the procedure and the court and the jurisdiction will be told. So now, while you were speaking, Arun, you used one word, white collar crime. In fact, that is something which students would have heard. But when it comes to the legal side, how would you define a white collar crime? Because most of them are related to corporate. That is why we want to ask this question.
See, white collar crime is nothing but people who are politically, socially, and financially well connected, and who are believed to be intellectually very high, and in a very loosely, I can also tell who are criminals who are very intelligent enough. So normally these are the persons who come under the bracket of white collar criminals. But if you ask me what is white collar crime, is essentially the people who are, these kind of people are involved, and they would abuse or misuse their positions in, with their capacity of where they are politically, financially, and socially, they are so well connected. Since they are highly influential, their crime would also have the equal render of like the consequences. It will be highly damaging to the people who are involved in it, or the people who are undergoing the loss under that.
Yeah, something like our Satyam case or Sahara Subrata Roy case, where in Sahara case, a lot of poor people lost their money and they had to pay a lot of interest and stuff like that. So that would be, I think, a classic example of a white collar crime.
Yes.
So what would you call as the opposite for a white collar crime?
See, white collar, like in the general understanding, they would also call like the conventional offenses. The conventional offenses are like where, until this economic liberalization came in, people never knew how Satyam fraud may happen. People never knew how Arshad Mehta would have a relevancy in the society, and has to, how he can play around with our money, not even with his own hard-earned money. How one person's hard-earned money would be giving a life to some person to become an overnight star or an overnight millionaire. So the conventional offenses, when we are talking about, they are also called as a blue-collared offense. Conventionally, like offenses like cheating, small cases like a theft or be it a murder, because these kind of offenses prevailed ever since human civilization is there. And as a society, when we decided to prescribe a law for our own selves, for our own good, these offenses prevailed. That is of, be it of a murder, be it of cheating, be it of uh, theft, or be it of an act of dacoity. These are all conventional offenses. But post economic liberalizations, these kind of white collar offenses have increased, and that have been very relevant, and relevancy is there for every student of law.
Yeah, I think see, this is the value add. I just want to draw the attention of the viewers. This is the value add when we talk to an expert, because he gave us the historical perspective. That is, once we got the economic liberalization, that is also when the economic offenses or the white collar crime were much bigger in size. Of course, there were few before that, few and far between, but it became more prevalent because there was too much liberalization, which people also misused, right from Arshad Mehta to Satyam to Subrata Roy to Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi, etc. So Arun, our next question is related to the directors, because most of the people who are watching this work with corporates, or tomorrow they'll work with different corporates. So if a director in a company were to be accused of a crime, it could be anything related to the finances of the company, or it could be swindling money, or any other crime. Well, procedurally, how should you go about it? Can you please let us know?
See, just for a moment, since you
Yeah,
asked us the procedural wise, just for a basic understanding as to how any criminal act would be, should be seen, or should be understood to set the law into motion, is also essential, because
yeah, yeah. I think we can start that.
yeah, that would in fact help us to have a more clarity about how to defend a director. For that reason, I'm
Sure.
asking. See, any criminal act would have two things. One is an act, and one more thing is the intention, because any crime would always start from a person's thinking. So mens rea is what I'm just like trying to suggest. So a person's intention as well as act is to be taken into consideration to understand whether it would fall under a category of a crime, or it would give him a benefit of doubt. Because if a person is to be called as a criminal, and if you want to call a particular act is to be defined, when it comes to criminal law, it is very strict. It should fall within the corners of these things, where an act as well as the intention should come under the category where it should give a position of, it can be perceived, it is beyond reasonable doubt that a person is involved in the act. So once we call this as an act of a crime, now the next question comes, how to deal with this understanding of these aspects as to how we deal with the directors, especially who are the persons who would be running a corporate entity. Because as a general understanding, corporate entities doesn't have a brain, doesn't have a limbs to go around and to commit the crime. It is always a human agency which would be playing from the back and from the backside to give a company a life or a legal life to it. So when it comes to a director's question, to make him responsible for an act of crime, what has to be understood is that we have to first understand as to what is a particular director's position in a company. So once we understand as to what is the position of a director and what is prescribed under law, and has he, as any individual, has he abided to it? If he has abided to it, and for an example, there is an allegation of person being as a director, basic understanding. For example, a company has issued a check. A company check is issued. A company check is issued and it gets bounced, and the special provision under Negotiable Instrument Act would come into picture. Because under Negotiable Instrument Act, Section 138 would prescribe that any person, because 138 would also deal with the acts committed by the company also. So Section 142 would deal as to who would be called, who are the persons who would be responsible for the company's check. Under 138 or Negotiable Instrument Act, merely because on a particular date a check has been issued, now it cannot automatically make all the directors as responsible to the checks. The requirement of law under Negotiable Instrument Act is that there should be a participation of that director in day-to-day activities of the company, and he should be aware of the transaction. If this is not even been asserted, or if it is not been stated in the complaint, when it comes to a check bounce case, if it is not been stated, the benefit of doubt or the director will not be made culpable or responsible to the check bounce. So for a check bounce case, even in a complaint, it has to be stated that a particular director has issued, and all these directors, A, B, C directors, are the regularly or day-to-day affairs, they are involved in the day-to-day affairs, and they were well aware of this transaction. All these aspects have to be stated. If they have not stated, there is every chances that a director can go to High Court and he can get a relief of quashing, because he may always say that though I'm a director, I'm a non-executive director, I'm not responsible to the day-to-day activities, I'm only as an advisory director. So these directors would have an exemptions. So now the first aspect was, as I said, of criminal intention and the act, both would be there. So here under Negotiable Instrument Act, the act of he doing the business day to day, and he is aware of the transaction and the check of a company, though he is not the signatory to the check, he would be made responsible, not otherwise. So when it comes to directors, all that any person who wants to defend him or a director has to be prosecuted is, we should understand what is his act, what is his position in a particular company, and what are his responsibility, which is already been prescribed under the law. If there is a failure of act which has been, or if there is an omission by him, that is when the criminal consequences would arise.
Okay. So now let's say now there is an omission, continuing with your point, there is an omission from the director and he's not fulfilled his duty. So how does he go ahead with the matter in terms of the procedure again? What's the next step he has to take to defend himself?
Okay, see, it is like this. If we are dealing, as I gave an example of, if in the complaint, if there is no averments, if there is no, not even a statement that, for example, we have taken A as a measures A as a company, which is been run by B, C, D. Okay. And in this, C and D are non-executive directors. It is only the B who is responsible of the company in the day-to-day affairs. He issues a check as a managing director. He would be issuing the checks, and in your all your what to say, the memorandum of association or the memorandum of company, where it would be saying that non-executive directors, there is a prescribed thing where it says that they are not responsible or they are not involved in day-to-day activities of the company. A person who now, if that A company is facing with the charge of a check bounce case, and all going by their online or the website, if a particular company or a drawer of the check who is entitled to get the money under the check, if he goes and prosecute in the court, and if he says like all these three persons are the directors and all these three persons are involved in day-to-day activities, in that case, if he goes to high court or if he goes to any forum of law, for example, a B and C would go to the high court, telling that C would say that, see, I am not responsible in the company, I am only a non-executive person. B would say, though I have issued the check, I do not know, it has been lost. Okay. In this case, C would have an advantage because C would show the averment in his memorandum of association to the effect that he is not active in the company. One. And he would also say that the signatory of the check is B. So I am not responsible. Correct. Okay. Here C may get an advantage in the high court saying that since he is a non-executive, you can't make him in as an accused. Okay. But when it comes to B, who may take a defense saying that no, they have theft our check, they have taken, it has been illegally taken the check, the court may say, go face the trial. In the trial, you can prove, because these are all facts. When we are talking about facts, the truthfulness of a fact will always be determined in the court. In a proper trial, where a concerned judge who would be conducting the trial, he would be going by the evidence which is being brought before the court. If B is taking a stand saying that this check has been lost, what is his immediate reactions when he claims that the check has been lost? When he has come to aware of a check has been lost, what is his things? What is his conduct at that juncture? Merely he can't say the check has been lost. He should show immediately when he has come. So these are all aspects which are to be understood, or it has to be adjudicated by a trial advocate, or rather a trial judge.
Okay. So basically all these have to be seen together and not just one action in isolation. That is what you're trying to say.
The reason why I told is that both the forums are open to a director.
Okay.
Both the forums saying that normally the practice in the Indian judiciary or Indian system, trial is believed it will take years together. Any criminal case or any civil case, it will take years together. If there is a legal ground, if there is a case which can be easily made out that it has been a misuse of law, it has been abuse of process of law, a person would go to high court saying that regardless to whatever the allegation is there, it is not backed by any evidence. So it is an abuse of process of law. So give me a relief. And court, in its jurisdiction under 482 CRPC, it can quash the proceedings, because mere allegation will not be sufficient to punish a person. It should be backed with the evidence. So at that juncture, the high court can be, if there are some evidences where there are gray areas, that has to be done in a trial court.
Okay, fine. So now we have another basic question. What is the role of police station in a criminal case or the criminal justice system, and what is their role?
See, in a crime, or while as a society, as a system, when we are looking at crime, it is always a two persons are involved. One is the injured or the victim or the deceased who have been affected by a crime. The other person, who is a person who will be facing the charge of committing it. Okay, while dealing with these two things, while both side would be having their own versions as per for a particular act which is to be called as a crime. So in our judicial system, always once a person is affected by any act of crime, the first person whom he would, or a first authority whom he would go, is for the police authority. Once a police takes the complaint or takes the information, because I'm using both this, a complaint as well as the information, because when I went through your whatever the brochure,
Study material of ICS.
study material, sorry, the study material, when I went through your study material also, there are subject matter which talks about the police powers, and also which talks about
complaint and all.
Complaint and all. See, once a crime is there, once a person goes with a grievance of crime, when he approaches the police, as I said, the first authority would be the police. The police would see the information or see the complaint. Once, it could be oral, it could be in writing. Once they understand the subject matter or any act, the police will first see whether it will come under their jurisdiction. Because jurisdiction, it is not only on the territorial aspect. Jurisdiction would also whether it is a cognizable offense. If there is a cognizable information, because police can't straight away go and take, for example, since I gave one example of a check bounce case, police can't be brought into picture in a check bounce case. Law prescribes that if a check bounce happens and if there is default, or if all compliances have been done under section 138, the person who has been aggrieved by issuing, like taking the check, and the check has been bounced, he has to approach the court. He can't go to the police. Likewise, if there is a theft at home, it is not requirement of law that you should go to court. You should go to the jurisdictional police, where they would take the information. Once they understand, yes, it is a case which we can get into, and that there is a requirement of investigation, they would take the complaint, and that complaint is treated as a first information. As I said, a complaint of oral in nature or be it in writing in nature. So once they take that, they can bring that information into a paper that is called as a first information report, which has been generally used as an FIR. Okay, once they register this first information report, the police have been designated for the purpose of investigating. See, police is an authority which does the investigation. Court is an authority which would adjudicate the matter. That is the difference. Of course, there are certain areas where court would also have a scope to investigate the matter. But in the given example, it is the police who take the information, they would do the investigation, and they would see the veracity involved in the allegations. And by their investigation, if it has been concluded by the police, yes, the act and the culprits, for example, in a theft, they are able enough to nab the person, and if they are able to recover the material, he would be arrested, he would be dealt with the court of law, and he would be dealt before the court of law to understand whether the police have done the fair investigation or whether the investigation is truthful or not. So police are the first authorities in any given case. In any given case, police are the first authority. They would be supervised or they would be adjudicated in the court of law.
Okay. I think that was again with the example when you told, it became very clear. Now that the police will take the first information report, do the investigation, and then who represents the defendant, and how does that work?
Yeah. See, in a criminal law, it is always the two parties, the adversaries who are involved is, one is the person who are prosecuting. They are called as, because crime is always treated as an act which is being committed against the society.
Yes.
And when it comes to a civil contract contraventions, it would be between two individuals where it is essentially, or it is called as a civil dispute. But when it comes to a criminal act, it is always treated as an act against the society. So when it is called as an act against the society, it is the state's responsibility to take care its citizens. Under this kind of system, in our system, it is the prosecution agency will be represented by a public prosecutor. He would be a government appointed advocate, and he would be called as a prosecutor.
Yeah.
And this prosecutor, his responsibility is that he has to present the case of the police before the court. And as a public prosecutor, he has every right, because he would be rendering justice not to the police alone. He would be rendering the justice to the society at large. He would be in the equal parlance of a judge, because even he will be seeing if there is a wrong case. A fair public prosecutor will always tell there is an unfairness adopted by the police. This is one part of the adversary. The other is of the defendant. They are called as a defense counsel, who would be defending a person who would be facing a charge before the court. So once a public prosecutor would be presenting the case of the police or the case of the prosecution, the defense or the defense counsel on the persons who are representing the accused persons are the persons who are facing the charges. The counsel or the accused would be given an opportunity to cross-examine the evidence, be it in the form of oral evidence or documentary evidences. Those veracities or those which has been, there are cases where they would construe out of nothing. If you see, that is how, the best example would be how a 2G case happened, because though the 2G case was so much hyped and so much of political gain, political talks happened, ultimately the prosecution failed before the trial court and all the accused were acquitted.
Yes.
Because merely by the sound it would not make out any case. It is the substance which would make out the case, substance which has been involved in the prosecution case. So as I said, it is always the prosecutor and the defense counsel, where he would be representing the prosecution and the defense would be representing the accused.
Okay, great. I think that we got a clear picture and students got the neat understanding. So now can you please tell us a little bit about what are the different kinds of criminal courts and also their hierarchy? Again, keeping students in mind.
Okay. See, when I'm talking, I'm giving reference to my previous discussions also, for the reason is that there is an interlink of all these things. See, I said about a person going to the police. That is the first authority. Okay. When it comes to courts, the first hierarchy or the lower hierarchy, if you see how the hierarchy would go up, is the very first court would be when it comes to metropolitan cities, wherever the population is more than 1 crore, those are called as metropolitans. There, the rank of the officer, the rank of the court would be metropolitan magistrates. Okay. Above that, it would be a court of sessions, who are the rank of district judges. So district court would be there. Above the district courts, it is the high court. Above the high court, it is the Supreme Court. Okay. So when it comes to any criminal case, if you are going to the court, the first court in a metropolitan city is a metropolitan magistrate. But when it comes to semi-urban areas, it would be the first rank judicial magistrate. They are called as first rank judicial magistrate. And they are also generally understood as a civil judges. Those civil judges are also called as judicial first class magistrates. Depending on their experience, they would be designated.
Okay, great. So now what about the economic offenses or related to finance matters which are criminal in nature? For these kind of matters, which are the courts which we need to address?
Okay. See, when it comes to economic offenses basically are, as I said, post economic liberalization, these kind of offenses, these kind of special enactments have come into picture. Okay. when given the special enactments have come in, the special enactments have also prescribed the special courts, because formation of courts are also prescribed, and a formation of special court is also required because it deals with the special matter, it deals about the new subjects. So it also equally requires a judge who understands the new subjects. So for that reason, there are special courts which have been designated under the special act itself. So under that, for example, if I want to give an example as to the economic courts, okay, the economic courts is nothing but where a particular court would be designated, be it a magistrate or be it a district court. They would be designated to deal with the cases which would be arising out of that special enactments.
In
Okay.
fact, even in the Companies Act, for students' attention, for matters which are criminal in nature, there are special courts which will deal only with the Companies Act 2013. Similarly, with FEMA and other offences also. Yes,
Yes.
sir, you can continue.
Yes. So as the law itself, because economic court or is nothing but a court which has been specially designated to deal with the special enactments.
Okay. So now that we know about the criminal courts, the hierarchy, and you also told us about practical things like the police investigation and all of that, there's one common thing which all the students here, that is especially in the corporate matters, which is criminal in nature, is Enforcement Directorate or ED. And also there's too much news about ED all the time. So what is the role of ED when we talk about the criminal justice system in India?
See, ED, the Enforcement Directorate, which is under the Department of Revenue Intelligence. Okay, this is an agency which has been created by the government, which was previously, in fact, it was before Economic Affairs Department. Now it is under the Revenue Intelligence. See, this investigation, this wing or this agency is an agency which would have a multi-dimensional approach, especially when it comes to offenses which are dealt under, that is Foreign Exchange Management Act, which is called as FEMA, and also PMLA, where money laundering offenses are involved. So these, especially Enforcement Directorate, would invoke these two provisions because it does involve a more of a complexity would be there in the any crime or any act of crime, because as I said previously, Indian Penal Code was sufficient for our society, but now since the dimensions of the crime has been changed, these new agencies are dealing through special provisions, and the Enforcement Directorate basically takes the information through intelligence wing, that is, be it that from the central agency or state agency, they would gather, so that if any particular act, because now when we are in an era of where globalization and where our borders are getting vanished day by day when it comes to economical interest is concerned, so a better understanding as to how an offense is to be dealt at and as to how an offender has to be brought into book, it does require a central agency who are well equipped, be it technology wise, be it the intelligence wise also. This agency would be dealing with those kind of offenses.
Yeah. Again, I want to draw the attention of students. So this is again, see, with the experience which Arun said, is basically the dimensions of the crimes or criminals in nature is completely changed when you talk about the traditional crimes or things like theft, robbery, even for that matter, murder. Now, when we talk about economic offenses, it's changed. So when the crimes have changed, how we deal with it should also change, and ED plays a very important role in the investigation side. So now I think we got a very good picture, and also the way you connected things from your examples was really interesting. So Arun, you told us right from what is criminal law, the brief about IPC and CRPC, and also how it works, the police system, the hierarchy of courts, all this we understood. Now, a student who's watching this will always wonder, what is the scope in criminal law if somebody were interested to practice What is the kind of gap in the market? So if you share some insights on that, I'm sure it will inspire many if they're interested in this field.
Yeah. See, in fact, I will be very happy if I'm able to encourage or make one person out listening to this discussion that he believes that he's made for criminal practice. Okay. So now see, when it comes to scope or the area for us to grow, especially on the criminal trial side or on the criminal practice side. Okay. See here, what I would like to say is that generally, when it comes to litigation side, it is always it is the hard work which matters, because for us it is the direction which matters, not the speed. So today's when it comes to the fast moving generation or fast moving society, see criminal law or any practicing would be seen or would be pursued, because I am one among them who was having this kind of a belief saying that practice is very lethargic, and it is also believed that it is not so interesting, because only once I came into this profession, it has given me an immense confidence, immense opportunity to show what my capacity is. So, as I said, it requires an hard work. One, two, it also helps to show our own skills, and it also gives a opportunity to ultimately have a good feeling that because of your hard work, you are able to give a natural smile to a person. You are being able to believe that because of your hard work, you are able to give someone a peaceful sleep. Yes, earning wise, and if you ask me, if you as a very long back, there is some statement by some good individual. I don't know who has stated this. It says like in a practice, it is initially it is only work, no earning. It is only learning at the first stage. Second stage where you will be very like some earning will be there, some work would be there. And the third level is that where you work so much and the earning would again go down. But the fourth level is that regardless to you work or you don't work, just by your name, the earnings would be following you. So it is an interesting way, and I would always say this to any of my colleagues or any of my interns who come here, that never ever see for an earning, you see for learning. For at least 15 years you must have a hard work in the profession, understand as to how procedures work, how a judge, because mere understanding of law, mere understanding of the subject matter will not make you a good lawyer. It also matters how good you can convince a judge, how good you can put across a point, how good you can get a relief for that moment, but in a legal way. So all these are is an individual development I'm talking about. With an individual development, equally when you are being reciprocated with financially in the due course of time, I think our profession has as sky as the limit. There is no limitation for this profession, and there is no retirement to this profession.
So if you're a student who's watching this, you may feel that criminal law is not your cup of tea, but definitely you'll start thinking about it from today after our guest Arun has shared his experience. And also, one more thing for students before we go ahead. When we talk to different advocates, what everyone is saying as a host, which I can observe, is that there is so much of scope in every field of law. It is not necessary that you should only stick to one. And like Arun said, it is your hard work. So if you're ready to work hard, opportunities is in fact more than what you can deliver. That is how huge the opportunities are. What they traditionally say, sky's the limit. It is very, very true. So that was Advocate Arun G on our episode of The Practical Side. So he shared his insights on IPC and CRPC, which is coming in the JIGL in CS Executive. So, Arun, thanks a lot for joining us. We look forward to have many more conversations with you.
Thank you, Alok, and thanks for Excel Academy also for giving me an opportunity. Okay, all the best to the students. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, students, for watching. That was the practical side. For more such videos, don't forget to subscribe to Excel Academy. You will be getting the best content which will help you not only for exams, for your entire career. Thank you very much and good luck to you.